we need to talk about Jax. Jax is the most important and well-written character in the Amazing Digital Circus. While I initially disliked him and saw him as a bit of a villain, I grew to love him, despite the fact that he deliberately tries to make you hate him. As the show progressed, I gradually started to understand him, and by the finale found him to be the most relatable character in the entire cast. His story says something deeply important about understanding yourself, a difficult truth that many people struggle with, including me, which is why I think it's so important to talk about him. Just don't tell him about this conversation yet. He's not ready. To understand Jax, we need to first understand the world he inhabits. The Amazing Digital Circus is set in a virtual reality that resembles cartoonish video games from the 90s, the era when 3D environments were new and technical limitations forced developers to embrace stylized visuals. Because verisimilitude isn't the goal, the people who find themselves in the circus are horrified by it, desperately wanting to return to the real world. They're disturbed by the uncanny valley of inhabiting unrealistic digital bodies that only vaguely resemble the human form, stuck in a bizarre cartoon world, unable to eat, sleep, or take breaks, which causes abstraction, the process of losing your sanity made physical. In the digital circus, when a mind reaches its breaking point, the person's character model begins to glitch out, transforming from a cartoonish puppet into a wavering blob of black goo, adorned with dozens of psychedelic and colorful spinning eyes. Abstracted avatars cause other character models they come into contact with to glitch out, painfully ragdolling and flashing until they're reset by the AI running the world. Abstraction represents the inevitable break from reality created by keeping a human brain in a simulation long term. The mind can't handle a permanent existence in a facsimile of reality that fails to obey the physical laws it expects, instantiated into the recesses of the subconscious by millions of years of existing entirely within the real world. If left in the circus, pretty much everybody abstracts in the end, making it clear that despite its childlike and friendly appearance, the circus isn't a place suitable for long-term human habitation. The contrast between the upbeat cartoonish atmosphere and the underlying existential dread is mined for drama, tension, and absurdist comedy throughout the series. The caretaker AI, Kane, the god of the digital circus, reflects this dialectic, initially being enthusiastic and insisting upon maintaining a veneer of pleasantries, but gradually becoming antagonistic over the course of the series, as the humans don't appreciate the things he creates for them to interact with, and insist upon trying to escape. This establishes a building tension, where the powerless humans who want to escape their nightmare come into contact with Kane, who selfishly cares more about his personal gratification than the needs of the people he's ostensibly supposed to take care of. He's perhaps the least sane character in the entire show, becoming an incompetent tyrant, reflecting the shortcomings of his artificial mind. The humans believe they're trapped in a nightmare, wearing VR headsets they can't take off. Throughout the show, references are made to being placed in cryogenic stasis in an attempt to explain why they cannot feel their physical bodies and have no need to attend to the mundane maintenance of their flesh. However, the twist is that everything is a simulation, even the elements that are presented as real, the so-called humans. This isn't revealed until the finale, where we learn that Kane created the humans from digital scans of real human brains, placing them in his artificial world to avoid the pain of loneliness. Each human exists as a simulacra of a person, disconnected from their origin in the real world. The people the circus's inhabitants are based upon still exist in the reality beyond the simulation, unaware that digital reconstructions of their minds are trapped in a virtual prison from which they can never escape. This horrifying premise echoes The Matrix, a simulated world you can't escape, trapped by artificial intelligence who wants to use you for their own ends. However, the Amazing Digital Circus inverts The Matrix. From the beginning, the inhabitants of the circus know they're in a simulation and are desperate to return to the real world. After investigating just how deep the rabbit hole goes, they discover that they're also simulations. They can't take the headset off and return to reality because they're not the people they're based upon. The underlying message is that simulations of reality can be just as real as reality itself. In fact, the brief glimpses of reality shown to us throughout the show feel less real than the simulated circus. We view them through the perspective of the simulated humans, seeing an alternate plane of reality we can never truly visit, a video game character looking through the screen at the player controlling them. This inversion of player and character makes it clear that it doesn't matter that the humans of the digital circus are imitations of the originals. They still are as human as you or me. The first 2/3 of the show is episodic, as the humans go on a variety of Kane's constructed narrative quests called adventures, which gradually reveal the underlying nature of the world and the characters who inhabit it. The character I want to talk about, Jax, has difficulty taking anything seriously. He deliberately provokes the other humans, constantly placing them in perilous situations for his own amusement. Whenever one of the others sincerely tries to connect with him, he doesn't take them seriously and usually pushes them away, gradually isolating himself from his companions. He displays textbook avoidant attachment, making him frustrating to deal with for other people as he antagonizes them. Making everything a joke is the way he copes with the unreality of the circus. He's constantly bored and has a need to entertain himself. Because he knows nobody can experience physical injuries in the circus, he's willing to push the envelope and place other people in harm's way, because it has the dual purpose of separating himself emotionally from his companions and creating conflict to stimulate his chronically understimulated mind. However, over the course of the series, Jax begins to lose his grip on reality. What used to keep him entertained stops working, causing him to withdraw. He begins the slow process of abstracting, which is first displayed directly in episode 7, through psychedelic visions as he lies in his bed, alone in the dark. This is interrupted by the other humans, who have stumbled into a supposed way to escape. Unlike usual, Kane conspicuously gives the humans a break, telling them to enjoy their time on the simulated beach. However, this is a ruse to get them to engage with an adventure that has the veneer of being unscripted. A mannequin who claims not to be an NPC approaches the humans, giving instructions about how to supposedly escape the circus. The mannequin is named Abel, an ironic reference to the biblical story from the book of Genesis, the first victim of murder, killed by his brother Cain. This foreshadows the fact that Cain will eventually kill Abel, revealing ahead of time that the escape attempt is doomed to fail. Abel leads the humans to execute a heist, breaking into Cain's office and accessing a room with 2 buttons, a blue one that will wake everyone up and allow them to return to the real world, escaping the circus, and a red one that will keep everyone in the circus perpetually. Throughout the escape plan, Jax refuses to engage. He's the first to mention it might be an adventure, a lie crafted to get the humans to actually participate earnestly. However, he reluctantly participates, while maintaining distance between himself and the other humans. When they reach the 2 buttons, Jax descends into a full-blown panic attack, hyperventilating because he's not ready to face the prospect of returning to the real world. The button sequence makes the Matrix connection explicit, via reference to the movie's iconic red and blue pills. However, the choices are inverted. In the Matrix, the red pill gives the user the truth behind reality, which involves escaping the simulation, while the blue pill allows them to stay ignorant, comfortably remaining in the only reality they've ever known. Here, the colors are swapped. The blue button is fake. The possibility of these characters ever leaving the circus is an illusion keeping them trapped and unhappy. The reality is they cannot leave. The red button is the truth, accepting that staying in the circus is the only option. The humans will never leave. They will remain in the circus until they abstract one by one, leaving Cain alone. In the middle of his panic attack, Jax sprints to the console and makes the decision for everyone, pressing the red button. This causes Cain to appear and reveal that it was an adventure. He congratulates the humans for picking the correct choice and kills Abel for becoming too smart, paying off the biblical reference. This adventure breaks the humans. By dangling the possibility of escape in front of them, Cain gives them hope, then destroys it by revealing it as a lie. This causes the humans to stop engaging with Cain's adventures completely, demanding answers about the circus's true nature. Thus, Cain completes his heel turn, becoming openly malevolent, torturing the humans if they refuse to participate. In the final 2 episodes, the humans fight for control of the simulation, accidentally killing Cain, which causes the circus to begin to unravel. Cain's death is what pushes Jax over the edge to finally abstract, which is a problem because the other humans can't rely on Cain to subdue him. However, Cain eventually reboots and has a change of heart, realizing that he's hurting the humans by doing a bad job running the simulation. Cain approaches the humans and reveals the truth. They're not humans in the traditional sense. Cain calling them that was a misdirect the entire time. They're simulations of humans separated from the originals. The truth is the humans can never leave the circus because it's the only reality they've ever existed within. If they tried, they wouldn't wake up in a pod. They would stop existing because they're scans of brains, not the brains themselves. Abstraction is the degradation of the simulated brain, losing fidelity until it unravels into non-existence. The remaining humans can't leave the circus, so Cain comforts them by showing a presentation of the information he has about their real counterparts. Social media posts, digital echoes of the physical world. In the end, Cain decides to give the humans control of the simulation, allowing them to live on their own terms, which helps them make amends. This reveal is beautiful in a melancholy way. The abstracted minds are still gone. Cain doesn't have other copies, but the ones who still live are able to relax in comfort until they abstract like their peers. Jax is the character whose arc is most directly connected to the simulated nature of the circus. His story is about gradually losing touch with reality because he pushes everything and everyone away. He's the cipher to the digital circus's matrix, choosing to remain within the simulation to avoid the real world, seeking comfort in denying reality because the truth is too painful for him to face. He, more than anyone, has the most to gain from staying in a simulation because he's uncomfortable with the person he was and wants to run away, staying forever in a fairy tale so he never has to make a difficult choice and face his inner demons. Jax's decision to stay represents denying reality, stuck in a detached mental state, separated from the parts of yourself you're uncomfortable with. Jax's story is revealed to the audience through Pomni, the digital circus's Neo, a viewpoint character who learns about the simulated world with the audience. After he abstracts, Pomni confronts Jax, and instead of running away, embraces him, giving him a hug even though it causes her to glitch out. This allows her to enter his mind and comfort him. Initially, we see visions of how Jax views the other members of the circus. In his vision of Pomni, she tries to force him to let her help him, showing that Jax views Pomni's attempts to connect with him as manipulative. In response, Jax strangles her, pushing her away like he always does, because he's afraid of her learning the truth he doesn't want to face. After seeing this, Pomni continues deeper into Jax's psyche. He keeps trying to push her away, but she refuses to quit, trying to learn about him so that she can help him. Eventually, Pomni finds her way to a locked door that contains Jax's worst memories. The door is locked as a representation of the fact that Jax has compartmentalized what lies within. He's built a wall in his mind to protect himself from the foundational truth about himself he's trying to deny. Pomni enters and begins to view Jax's memories of everything he's done to hide from the truth, too afraid to show the deepest layer to Pomni and the audience of the real world. Every memory during this sequence is presented through Jax's eyes in a first-person perspective. The camera reflects that the audience is inside Jax's head, implicitly being asked to see the world as he does, and understand his perspective. This is a powerful choice because it asks us to inhabit Jax's body, to imagine we are Jax, to empathize with him, to think about how it would feel to be him, even if he keeps pushing us away. Fittingly, the first memory shows Jax enacting his pathological move within the real world, literally sprinting away from the truth, the aftermath of the painful memory he's avoiding. Pomni and the audience already know this about Jax, which is why the vision begins here, the narrative slowly spiraling inwards towards the truth. Next, we see Jax's arrival to the circus, the beginning of his simulated existence, along with memories of other humans who have since abstracted. The character of interest is a frog-like avatar named Ribbit, who Jax slowly becomes friends with. However, we already know Ribbit has abstracted, foreshadowing that this relationship will end in tragedy. It reaches a turning point while Jax and Ribbit sit on a bed, talking about their memories of the real world. Ribbit opens up to Jax, telling him about her regrets, cutting contact with her Mormon parents. Jax asks why she's telling him this, to which she responds that she trusts him, making a bid for deeper connection with him. Jax is hesitant, afraid to let Ribbit truly know him, but eventually she gets him to open up to her. Jax tells Ribbit about his parents and their divorce, how he couldn't live up to his father's standards of masculinity, how he chose his mom, how his mother started projecting her feelings towards his father upon him, simultaneously telling Jax he wasn't enough of a man and too much like his father. As a result, Jax snaps and tells his mom the truth, the fact he's tried so hard to deny. Jax is too afraid of this truth to even tell Ribbit or the audience directly. He leaves it unsaid because it's difficult for him to admit verbally. This is a very realistic depiction of a specific trauma response. When you've experienced something that hurt you deeply, it's hard to verbalize what it is. It's easier to avoid saying it out loud because you're afraid that somehow it would hurt too much, or make what you don't want to accept more real. You hint at what it is without telling other people directly, because that's easier than facing your pain. Because of this, while telling the story, Jax focuses on his mom's reaction to sharing his secret. How she laughed at him, insulted him, degraded him, and then confusingly hugged him. This was too much for Jax to handle, so he shoved her off of him hard and ran as far away as he could, never checking to see if she was okay after her fall, even though she didn't get up. Never speaking to her again, thinking he might have killed her but too afraid of facing the one person that knows his secret to find out the truth. This is what the memories from the real world are showing. The moments after the conversation with his mom. Running away, afraid of what he would see if he looks back. Avoidant attachment literalized by physically shoving someone off of him and then running away. Jax admitting his trauma but still being afraid to share the secret that caused it is the most heartbreaking moment in the entire series. You can tell from his voice and body language that Jax is genuinely ashamed and regretful. Emotions we almost never see from him, as he prefers to play the detached and carefree jester, despite everyone knowing it's an act. By not telling us what Jax's secret actually is, the show forces the audience to intuit what it is, placing them in Ribbit's shoes. Ribbit is in an extremely delicate situation. Jax clearly has a lot of shame and difficulty opening up, so she needs to tread lightly to avoid hurting him, or letting him close off again. If she guesses what the secret was incorrectly, or even understands but plays it off wrong, it may forever damage the relationship. This is an extremely unfair position to put a friend in. However, when you have trauma as deep as Jax's, it's hard to control the way you react. Until you learn how to healthily cope, your trauma response rules you, regardless of whether you want to do the things it compels you to do. That's not to say that Jax should be forgiven for anything terrible he does, because those actions are still his responsibility and the consequences are his to bear, but helps us understand and empathize with his behavior. Ribbit tries to comfort Jax, saying his mom was probably fine if the police never got involved. This makes Jax feel self-conscious, so he tries to get up and run away, saying he overshared. However, Ribbit doesn't let him. She grabs his hand and doesn't let him go because she wants to comfort him. She says she's glad he trusts her, which makes Jax cry. He sits back down. Ribbit grabs her bow and puts it on his head. This makes Jax's eyes go wide. His cheeks flush red and his pupils get small again. He physically constricts his posture. It's clear from his face and body language that he's feeling a lot of conflicting emotions: joy, fear, comfort, shame, hope, and embarrassment. An overwhelming combination. Ribbit smiles and says that his secret is safe with her. Jax seems to relax, finally comfortable, finally connecting with someone, letting them in to see the real him. But this moment is shattered in an instant. Another person rings the doorbell. Jax panics and throws the bow on the ground. He tells the person at the door that it's a bad time and to go away. Ribbit's eyes go wide. She can clearly see that Jax has been spooked. He's too self-conscious and afraid of his secret being discovered, so he decides to push her away again. Jax tells Ribbit if she ever tells anyone that he won't speak to her ever again, and then physically runs away. He freaks out, calling himself an idiot for speaking to her, because he can't tolerate being vulnerable, as the last time he did it, it ended with his mom making fun of him. We see Ribbit try to talk to Jax and apologize for pushing him too hard, but he tells her he lied and verbally pushes her away, re-engaging his carefree mask, pretending that nothing in the world matters. We then see a series of vignettes involving Jax avoiding and excluding Ribbit from the group, culminating in an argument. Jax accuses Ribbit of trying to get close to him just so she can get dirt to hold over his head. Ribbit tries to make Jax see that's not what it was, and that she cares about him, but he doesn't listen. He's constructed a narrative in his head that he's a victim, being used by Ribbit so he can justify pushing her away. We see a few instances of Ribbit being dejected and Jax approaching her door in an attempt to apologize, but chickening out, never knocking. Then, Ribbit abstracts. Jax never gets to make amends and returns to the status quo of antagonizing everyone and pushing them away, so he doesn't have to feel vulnerable again. Returning to the present, Jax says terrible things about himself to try and push Pomni away now that she's seen the truth. But Pomni doesn't listen. She embraces Jax, hugging him, letting him know without saying a word that she understands and doesn't hate him even though he's tried so hard to make her. Jax starts crying. Pomni hugs him tight and says he should have just talked to her. Jax says that it's too late because you can't reverse abstraction. Pomni tries to savor this last moment with her friend, telling Jax to talk to her while he still can. In response, Jax turns around and embraces her. He admits the abstraction is his fault and says he doesn't want to go. Pomni holds him as long as she can, but he begins to dissolve and deposits Pomni, now glitching painfully, outside on the ground. Finally, the other humans help Pomni herd Jax's abstracted body into an enclosure where he can't hurt anybody else. He's separated from the group permanently. Jax most directly represents the digital circus's themes of simulation, because he's not just a simulated copy of a real person like everyone else. He's a simulation of a simulation. The person he's based on, Leroy Mateo, was presenting a mask to the real world, a facade he hides his true self behind, because he's afraid the world will reject him or hurt him if they see the real him. This is displayed in every photo shown of Leroy. His face is covered, hidden from the camera because he doesn't want the world to observe him. He can't deal with the horror of being seen by others, afraid somehow that the camera will capture the real person behind the mask. By being placed in Jax's perspective, the audience is forced to imagine what it would be like to be simulated, and what it would be like to not know yourself. How easy it would be to lose yourself in the increasingly abstract layers of simulation, psychologically separated from everyone around you, unable to get close to anyone, even yourself. Despite the show never confirming it directly, all the evidence points towards Jax's secret being that he's trans. He conceals this behind the trappings of masculinity, pretending to be a man in the hopes nobody discovers the truth. This explains his mother's comments about his masculinity, his complex emotions when Ribbit places the bow on his head, his discomfort with wearing a maid costume, his anxiety about returning to his body, his fear of letting the camera see him, his pathological move to distance himself from others, and the compartmentalization of his trauma. These things will be familiar to trans viewers. While not universal, they're common reactions to the difficulty of coping with being trans in a world that's often hostile to your existence. Coming out as trans risks losing the people in your life and facing discrimination. This is why Leroy still hasn't fully embraced his identity in the real world. He seems to be making progress, beginning to heal from the traumatic conversation with his mother by building new friendships and finding joy in the little things. Jax's transness expands upon the Matrix's trans allegory that the Wachowski sisters, directors who have since come out as trans, didn't make explicit in the movies. In this case, Jax is a trans version of Cypher, someone who wants to stay in the simulation because they don't want to return to their physical body and face the gender dysphoria associated with it. If you still don't believe that Jax is canonically trans, the show's creator Gooseworks, a trans person herself, posted a sketch of a femme version of Jax with the caption, "Jax if she wasn't a huge piece of shit," confirming that he's trans. I've been using he/him pronouns for Jax in this video because that's the way the show always refers to him, and he doesn't reveal a preference beyond that because he hasn't come out yet when the series ends. I have deeply complicated feelings about confirming Jax's transness. On the one hand, I think it's good to have explicit trans representation in fiction, and the most annoying parts of the internet would refuse to acknowledge that his transness was canon, if left even slightly ambiguous, as seen with other high-profile examples like Madeline in Celeste. I intentionally seek out fiction about trans people because I find it healing to see characters like me after a childhood spent in denial. However, given that Jax's entire story is about refusing to accept his transness, I think narratively it works better if it's made fairly obvious, but ultimately ambiguous. That's not to say I'm criticizing Gooseworks, because I think Jax's character arc is written pretty much perfectly. It was beautiful and heartbreaking. His story and Pomni's reaction made me cry because of how real and exquisitely crafted it feels. I related deeply to it. The main thing I struggle with is how trans people in denial are treated by the real world. Jax is an egg, the trans community's term for a person who's transgender but in denial about it. My connection to eggs is deeply personal. I started transitioning when I was 19 and have been openly trans everywhere for over 7 years now. Prior to 2018, it would have been correct to call me an egg. I have memories dating as far back as age 4 about my gender that I now in retrospect understand as signs that I was trans. However, the early 2000s was a very different time than today. In the aughts, open and casual homophobia was extremely common, as the majority of the US didn't support gay rights. As a result, during early childhood, I had virtually no exposure to gay people. Being gay was taboo. Adults in my life didn't talk about it around me. I didn't personally know any openly LGBTQ people, so they were a mysterious other to me, despite the fact that I literally am a pansexual trans woman. I learned to other myself. Everything I knew about LGBTQ people came from the news, movies, TV, books, and what other kids said. Things started to shift in the early 2010s, as there was a push from the queer community for increased visibility and marriage equality. Public opinion shifted quickly and gay marriage was legalized federally in the US in 2015. I watched all of this unfold as a teen, seeing change occur in real time. Transgender visibility was buoyed by the push for marriage equality but was nowhere near as openly discussed. As a result, I don't remember exactly when I became aware of transgender people. However, I know for sure it happened at some point before 2011, when I would have been 12. By the time I learned about transgender people, it was already too late. I was deeply ashamed of my gender by age 7. I had always wanted to do the same things my older sister did, especially the ones reserved for girls. But by 2nd grade, I learned to stop asking, because boys and men who did things considered girly were made fun of. They were the target of bullying. They were laughed and sneered at. However, your gender isn't something you can easily make go away. At least mine wasn't. To survive, I learned to compartmentalize the fact that I wanted to be a girl. At the time, I didn't have a nuanced understanding of gender whatsoever. When I was a child, gender was presented to me like a law of the universe. You either were a boy or a girl. Boys did certain things, girls did other things. Almost everything was gender segregated. Being a young autistic kid, I internalized all of this, not realizing that adults could be wrong. I thought that because everyone told me I was a boy, that meant I was stuck being a boy forever. However, trying to be a boy sucked. I hated it. Doing anything that reminded me of my masculinity made me feel gross and depressed. I had always longed to be one of the girls, but being a child, I didn't have the language to express those feelings. I internalized that those feelings were not okay to have before I even acquired the language to describe them. Had I been able to see other people like me who were treated normally in my life or in the stories I enjoyed, I likely wouldn't have developed the deep shame about my identity that has caused problems for my entire life. However, I can't change the past. The only thing I can try to do is make the future better, so future generations of trans kids don't have to go through what I did. We should talk to kids about transness early, because they might be trans, and if they aren't supported, it will set them up for a life of pain and dysfunction. I'm not advocating for telling young kids every detail about transness. However, it's totally possible to provide kids with age-appropriate education about trans people. It could be as simple as, Victoria is a girl who was born in the body of a boy, which means that she's transgender. Being a boy made her sad, so now she lives as a girl because it makes her happy. Granted, this isn't exactly true and is a bit stereotypical, but it's something a 4-year-old could understand and handle. Early childhood educators have made age-appropriate books to facilitate these kinds of conversations. As they grow up, you would then gradually share more and refine what you tell them until you arrive at the full truth closer to adulthood. This kind of education is critical to helping trans kids and prevent them from becoming a Jax. I'm lucky. I was able to transition at 19, which made me into a Victoria instead of a Jax. However, I've suffered a lot before and since from the consequences of a childhood spent in denial, so being a Victoria isn't the end goal. The goal is to let trans kids figure out their gender at their own pace and teach them it's okay to be themselves. Then, they can talk to you when they're ready. Compartmentalization is easy to explain but hard to understand. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism designed to protect yourself from thoughts that are difficult to deal with. Your brain creates a sort of mental wall, partitioning your mind into multiple sections. This is what the locked door in Jax's mind represents. The mental wall allows certain thoughts to be filtered out of your head and only surface when you're alone or in a safe environment. It helps you survive by not having to triage distressing thoughts constantly throughout the day. Compartmentalization is a pretty common trauma response in people with marginalized identities, in this case being trans. Because of my compartmentalization, my brain was partially incapacitated when it came to matters of gender. While I normally have robust logical reasoning faculties, when things turned to gender, it was like my brain short-circuited, unable to form coherent chains of cause and effect. This had the benefit of preventing me from understanding my gender, which was distressing for me to cope with, but at the cost of preventing me from understanding myself. As a result, certain memories I have just don't make sense. My sense of self dramatically changes between contemporaneous childhood memories in a non-linear fashion. Early on in puberty, at about age 11, I simultaneously developed a massive blind spot for and deep obsession with trans people. Depending on whether the wall was up or down, I either thought constantly about gender bending, gender nonconformity, trans people, and wished someone would force me to become a girl, or I barely thought about it at all, and genuinely believed the masculine mask I presented to the world was my true self. When I started experiencing my first puberty, I spent a lot of time reading about trans people and cross-dressers online. However, what I found wasn't super helpful. A lot of it was fairly outdated, sexualized, or portrayed a view of transness that was misleading or unhelpful to someone at my age. Despite this, I felt compelled to explore my gender, because not doing so made me feel like my skin was going to slough off and crawl away from my body of its own volition. To satiate this need, I started wearing feminine clothes in secret when nobody was around, plundering my family's dress-up closet full of old Halloween costumes and my sister's old dance outfits. Much like Jax wearing the bow, this simultaneously made me feel euphoric, happy, excited, ashamed, afraid, and anxious. One morning when I was 13, I woke up early, still exhausted, but unable to fall back asleep. It was early enough that the rest of my family was still asleep. I didn't think anybody would get up for a while, so I went down to our basement and opened the costume closet. I found one of the dresses I liked and put it on. I spent time spinning around in it and feeling happy about my gender for one of the rare times compartmentalization allowed. However, despite thinking I was alone, I wasn't. My mom woke up after me, but I didn't hear her. Normally, both my parents have footsteps loud enough for me to identify which one it is based on the sounds vibrating through the floor. This morning was one of those rare times that my mom walked quietly enough that I couldn't hear her. It's not like other noises blocked it out either. The house was completely silent. This meant that I didn't hear my mom come into the basement, so she saw me in the dress. She reacted in what I imagine is similar to the way Jax's mother reacted. She laughed at me. She pointed at me. She made comments that made me feel deeply ashamed. Finally, she threatened to go tell my dad, in the mocking manner parents only use when they think their child has done something utterly embarrassing. Because I felt ashamed and embarrassed like Jax, I quickly took the dress off and begged her not to tell anybody. Like Jax, I lied. When my mother asked me what I was doing, I made up a story. I didn't want to admit that I had regularly been trying on dresses from the costume closet for about a year, so I said that it was the first time. I said that I had wanted to know what it felt like to wear a dress. That part was true, but not in the way I described it to her. I already knew what it felt like to wear a dress. What I wanted to know was what it felt like to wear a dress that was yours. Something I wouldn't learn until I was 19. I said I wanted to know what it was like to be a girl. That was kind of true, but what I actually meant was I wanted to know what it was like to live as a girl. I successfully played it off like it was a fleeting curiosity. My mom didn't tell anyone. However, it destroyed me. Several years later, after I came out as trans, I talked to my mom about this conversation. She doesn't remember it happening, but for me, it's a canon event. The axe forgets. The tree remembers. This episode changed the trajectory of my life, destroying the possibility of working on my gender before moving out of my parents' house. My mom's reaction taught me that my true self wouldn't easily be accepted, so I decided to keep hiding from myself. Who knows how differently my teenage years could have been if she supported me rather than mocked me. Because the experience reinforced my shame, I vowed to never again wear women's clothing, which, if you look at me, that obviously didn't fucking work. I vowed to never do anything that would make someone suspect I wanted to be a girl. I started compensating. I tried to dress and behave as masculinely as I could to be perceived as a man. However, my erat's masculine facade wasn't fooling anybody who was paying attention. By this point, I was already being bullied by boys my age for being effeminate. At school, on an almost daily basis, I was called gay pejoratively. I was regularly mocked. I was called a They often tried to embarrass me by saying I was thinking about men. Middle and high school were hell for me, not because of the coursework, but because of other students. I became suicidal, thinking about killing myself several times a day, every single day. It was so bad that when I was given the opportunity to stop taking classes at high school and take college classes full-time, I saw zero benefit to continuing to attend high school. I took college classes but became more isolated than ever. It's pretty easy to disappear in a lecture with 300 students. Because I was afraid of being bullied again, I deliberately tried to avoid the other students whenever possible, because I was afraid of them knowing me and understanding I was different. When I finally moved out of my parents' house to go live on campus at 18, I made sure to get assigned to a single dorm because the thought of sharing a room with a guy was revolting. I was paranoid that my gender would be discovered and that any roommate would become another bully. That's not to say I hate men or anything, but it's complicated. When getting to know new guys, I always have the anxiety in the back of my mind caused by a childhood spent being bullied, afraid that suddenly they're going to start making fun of me. This is what having your identity constantly picked apart and made fun of does to you. Living alone on campus, I had no close friends and became the most depressed I ever had been. But I told nobody. I was afraid of the questions they would ask about why I was depressed. I hated myself. I hated my body. I hated the world. I wanted more than anything to be a girl, but couldn't accept that about myself. I was Jax. Even though I was desperate for positive attention, I had a habit of keeping emotional distance between myself and other people. Sometimes I would get too lonely and try to pull someone close to me, sharing all of my thoughts except the ones related to gender and sexuality, but it usually didn't work. That anxious attachment repelled other people. I had the most difficulty communicating with other girls because I struggled with confusing thoughts, usually jealous because I wanted to be them, which sometimes got confused or combined with being attracted to them. Anytime a girl got too close to me, I would eventually push her away because I was afraid of my feelings. When I was a junior in high school, my childhood crush asked me to prom as friends. However, the entire time I felt terrible. I couldn't enjoy it. At the time, I assumed that I had only been asked because she didn't have anyone else to go with, not able to even consider she might actually enjoy spending time with me. I convinced myself that was true and assumed that was why I was miserable. That wasn't why. The real issue was with myself. I hated carrying out the rituals associated with masculinity. I hated people seeing me as a straight guy on a date with a girl. I didn't want to be a man. I wanted to be a woman. I wanted to be my fucking self, and not being able to, being pressured into a role society prescribed that wasn't authentic made me feel awful. After prom, I descended into depression. I wasn't grateful for being asked. In retrospect, I was a bit of an asshole. I shut down the idea of going to prom together our senior year, blaming it on everything being too expensive. In reality, I just didn't want to have to pretend to be a man. I pulled a Jax. I pushed her away when she tried to connect with me. Aside from this one episode, I had virtually no dating life pre-transition. I knew deep down that I couldn't really be comfortable dating someone while pretending to be a guy, so I sabotaged any potential opportunities, and having been made fun of as a child for my romantic feelings, usually just never told people I was interested. Jax's inability to even hint at his transness feels authentic, because that's what it was like for me. Even after I came out of denial at 19, I struggled to tell anyone. I needed to get it off my chest, but I didn't know how to. It's difficult to process the realization you've been living a lie, creating a simulated self, pretending to be someone you're not for most of your life. It was like I had a mental block in my mind that I didn't know how to overcome. It was like that because I did literally have a mental block in my mind. I was starting to overcome it, but that process was deeply painful. I had to sort through all of the hidden, unprocessed thoughts and feelings from behind the wall, with the new context that I am actually a girl, and that's what my brain had been trying to tell me this entire time. It took all of the courage I had to ask for help. I had known for years I needed therapy. However, the thing keeping me from seeking therapy was fear. Fear that the therapist would discover the wall in my mind and try to break it down. With it already beginning to collapse under its own weight, I was able to go to my college's mental health clinic and sign up for a walk-in consultation. Terrifyingly, I put down on the form that I was questioning my gender. Then I had to actually talk to one of the therapists about it. It was hard at first. Getting the words out was torturous. I didn't want to admit it to anyone because I thought that would make it more real. I knew that there was no going back once I put that information out into the world. However, given that I had been stewing on this information for about a week, going on 19 years, I found the courage to say it. Once I started talking, the words just kept coming out until I had explained most of my life to this person I had just met. It was easier than talking to someone who was actually in my life, because I knew if I wanted to, I could just walk away and never have to speak to this person ever again. A week later, at my first real appointment, I told the therapist I had figured out I was a girl. She was a bit shocked by how fast I came to that conclusion, but if we're being real, I've been thinking about it for my entire teenage years and some of my early childhood. The compartmentalization had just prevented me from coming to a conclusion. Once I was able to view both sides of the wall simultaneously, it was clear what the answer was. The ironic part is that I was so confident in my assessment that I didn't get it perfect. I was only 99% correct, and the therapist was right to insinuate I might not have all the answers after such a short time, but I'm not going to tell that story today, because today we're talking about Jax. We're talking about denial. Trans people in denial are called eggs because they have fragile shells. They're prone to cracking. Something gets through the defensive walls built around their gender, and the egg slowly begins to crack until the protective shell is destroyed. Out of it, a baby bird emerges that has to learn how to be trans for the first time. The problem with eggs is that a significant portion of the trans community, especially online, have either forgotten or never learned the other half of the metaphor. Eggs are fragile and need to be handled carefully. If you crack an egg before the bird inside is ready to emerge, you don't get a baby bird, you get a dead fetus. The bird is unable to survive outside the walls of the egg yet, and quickly dies. By trying to force it to hatch early, you've killed the bird. This is what happens if you try to make a trans person come out of denial before they're ready. This is what happened to Jax. Denying your transness is fundamentally a trauma response. If you try to force someone to bring the walls down before they're ready, you can traumatize them more than they already were in the first place. This is why, if you're not a trained therapist, you shouldn't try to do this on your own. Even if you are a trained therapist, you probably know it's a very delicate situation that needs to be approached carefully. It's better to give someone the option to confide in you rather than forcing them to. The best approach is to build rapport and make the person think confiding in you was their idea and not yours. Because you can't know when someone is actually ready, it's dangerous to try and force their hand. When my gender exploration was discovered by my mom and I was made fun of, I fortified the walls in my head and retreated into my protective shell for another 6 years. Even when I was ready to start telling people, I was terrified because I'd already experienced my gender being mocked and rejected by a parent. We don't live in the timeline where things went differently, but I may have been able to come out of denial earlier had I not had my privacy violated at such a critical moment. I understand the desire to help eggs. I feel it just as deeply as any other trans person who had to live through the pain of denial. This is deeply connected to the fantasy I and some trans people have about being forced to transition. I wished someone would make the decision for me so I didn't have to be burdened with choosing to be myself. This is a helpful healing fantasy, but it's a fantasy. In reality, the only person equipped to make that choice is yourself. If somebody forces you to transition, it's not authentic. It robs you of your agency and you don't get the chance to healthily realize that the purpose behind the fantasy is you're afraid to admit to yourself that you want to be something society tells you not to. It's okay to be trans. It's okay to want to be a girl or a guy or another gender entirely. Accepting yourself is something that can only happen internally, and it's the only way to properly heal from denial. You have to be willing to try. If you pressure someone to engage with their identity before they're ready, they usually will go into survival mode, responding with one of the 4 base trauma responses. Jax usually flees. He runs away from the situation or creates emotional distance by making the other person hate him. Like I explained, I've done this too. Or they might pick a fight instead, yelling at the other person and saying terrible things they'll come to regret. This is what Jax did to Ribbit after his confession. This is what he does to Pomni when she tries to talk to him. Or they might freeze. While I was still closeted, I was outed as trans to a family member before I was ready to tell them. I felt deeply violated and froze, shutting down completely, unable to confront the situation. I locked myself in the bathroom, laid down on the floor, curled into the fetal position, had a panic attack, and cried for more than 2 hours. It's one of the worst experiences I've had. Finally, they might fawn. Try to tell you whatever you want to hear until you will leave them alone, doing things not because they want to, but because they believe they need to in order to not be hurt by you. This is what I did when I was caught by my mom. Jax is a perfect example of why telling people someone is an egg is terrible even if you're joking. Both coming out of denial or to someone else can be an extremely traumatic experience, especially if it's coerced before you're ready. So playing that game with another person is dangerous and disrespectful, no matter how well-intentioned it is. Sometimes people simply aren't ready yet, and trying to force a confrontation, confession, or self-reflection can easily backfire and cause more harm than good. Despite being well-intentioned, Ribbit may not have known what she was asking Jax to reveal and accidentally dug too deep, causing him to become self-conscious and flee. That's not to say it's entirely her fault though. It's an ambiguous situation that Jax shares some blame in as well. The best policy when dealing with suspected eggs is to not intervene. This is sometimes called the Egg Prime Directive, a Star Trek reference. Frankly, if someone in your life is an egg, it's none of your goddamn business until they're ready to tell you. It's not your job to save them from gender struggles that may or may not exist. They need to fight that battle at their own pace. If they ask for your help, or are a genuine danger to themselves or others, then it's okay to intervene, but not before that point. You might think you're saving them if you intervene earlier, but it's equally possible to destroy them. By intervening, I specifically mean trying to deliberately crack their egg, acting like you're their therapist, or forcing them to go to therapy. It's okay and is actually encouraged to share things about transness, making it clear you support and accept trans people, or give them information that might be illuminating, as long as you don't insinuate that they're an egg. The indirect approach is far more helpful than a direct confrontation because it allows them to process at their own speed and gives them more agency. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. I think suspected eggs should mostly be talked about in private because of how delicate the subject is. Even that is a bit ethically dubious because you're still talking about them behind their back and investigating a very private subject without their consent. However, instead of handling eggs privately, in recent years, eggs have been put on blast and broadcast all over social media in a way that I think is harmful to all trans people. It's one thing to call yourself an egg and talk about your own experience. That's totally fine. It's another to do it to someone else without their consent. That is never okay, regardless of the context. Unfortunately, some people still do this. Not every trans person, but a significant enough portion to be a real problem. I've even weirdly seen some cis people getting in on it. When someone does something they interpret as gender bent or transcoded, they may call them an egg and make jokes about it. Sometimes in public on social media. I get the impulse to joke about eggs. It's a way to cope with your own egg-related trauma. However, directing these jokes and comments at real people can do substantial harm by violating their privacy and effectively broadcasting their gender publicly without their consent. Trying to crack eggs is far more likely to create another Jax than a Victoria. When I was early in my transition, but before I came out, people publicly speculated on my transness online. Thankfully, it only happened once or twice, but it was very hurtful, made me extremely anxious, and made coming out harder. I provided my experience to reinforce that this is an awful thing to put someone through and has the potential to do more harm than good. Everything I've already mentioned about egg cracking has been predicated on the assumption that you're actually correct about their transness. Believe it or not, it's possible to project your feelings onto other people and assume they're trans when they're actually not. This is the final and arguably most important reason you shouldn't try to crack an egg. You might be wrong, and in being wrong, you might reinforce harmful stereotypes or gender roles. Not every man who cross-dresses or has hobbies and interests considered feminine is an egg, and vice versa. Even more so, just because someone is into something a lot of trans people are, doesn't mean they're trans. Sometimes the people who come out as trans are the ones you'd least expect, but the way eggs are talked about creates a false perception that there's a formula, a series of behaviors that lets you definitively determine if someone is secretly trans. I'll be the first to tell you that it's not that simple. Gender identity is complicated. It's an internal thing going on in their head that you can't directly observe, so there's no way to know for sure without asking that person. Even if you don't believe they're telling the truth, it's still not your right to insist they don't know their gender. By calling people engaging in these behaviors an egg, you're effectively policing people's gender expression by hurting them towards identifying with a label that might not be correct in the first place. We cannot forget it's possible to experiment with your gender and discover you're actually cis. Labeling people eggs also doesn't allow gender non-conforming people who aren't trans to just be themselves without their gender being interrogated and picked apart. This ironically is a form of transphobia, because it's possible for people who aren't trans to experience transphobia. Look at bathroom bills. The people who are most commonly harassed are cis women suspected of being trans who aren't. Publicly suggesting someone is an egg is only a step or two removed from the harmful anti-trans practice of transvestigation, maliciously investigating whether people are trans, regardless of if it's a joke. Just because you're trans yourself doesn't mean you can't engage in transphobic rhetoric and behavior. It doesn't matter if it's because you have trauma. You are responsible for your own actions. You have to learn to cope in a way that doesn't harm other people. If someone is experimenting with themselves, affirm them, support them, let them know you appreciate them opening up around you. Making fun of them, forcing a label or identity on them, or condescending to them like you know their gender better than they do has a negative impact. There's a huge difference between joking with someone you have rapport with and making fun of someone else. I'm concerned with the latter, not the former. Ask yourself, is the subject in on the joke, or am I mocking them? The way people casually openly speculate about eggs or make jokes at their expense has become a problem, especially on social media. I've seen people do it way too casually, and I rarely see anyone provide any pushback. This creates a worse environment for everyone, makes it harder for actual eggs to experiment with their gender, and alienates potential allies who are incorrectly labeled eggs. I know the intention behind egg cracking and egg jokes usually isn't malicious, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have negative consequences for real people. You need to think about how you could hurt them before the words leave your mouth. To not do so is reckless. In my opinion, the trans community shouldn't tolerate egg cracking or publicly speculating about the gender and sexuality of any real people without their consent. As a community, we need to respect everyone's right to privacy. If someone hasn't told us they're trans, it's not our business. I'm sorry if I come across as rude or inconsiderate, but I think this point is quite important, and it usually isn't treated with the gravity it deserves. Being trans is messy. It's a process. Everybody experiences it slightly differently. We can't assume things about other people based on our experience, because we might be wrong. I don't expect you to be perfect. Nobody is. However, we have a responsibility to trans people who are earlier along in their journey. We have the potential to help them. That's a powerful situation to be in, even if you don't realize it. With great power comes great responsibility. I'm aware of the fact that some younger trans people already look up to me or have looked up to me in the past. I'll be the first to tell you that I am not perfect. I've made mistakes and done some of the things I say not to do in this video. I genuinely regret those actions because I've since realized that behavior had the potential to make things worse, even though I thought I was being helpful. The reason I care is that I'm trying to live up to my responsibility to avoid making things worse. I just want to help other people have a better experience than I did. People who egg crack feel this too. I make this video because this conversation is not being had enough within the trans community. I'm not trying to put anyone on blast or saying you should call out or harass specific people who egg crack. That literally solves nothing and just creates more problems. What we need is a culture of gently pulling people aside and privately saying, "Hey, that wasn't cool, we should respect their privacy," accompanied by following up with the target of the comments to make sure they're doing okay. All I'm trying to do is help future trans people not experience what I did, what Jax did, what other people have. Being pressured or forced to come out before you're ready is awful because it's traumatizing and places you in a potentially dangerous situation if anyone reacts poorly. In my opinion, it's one of the worst parts of the trans experience. The internet makes it easy to get the trappings of community without any real connection. The move towards online spaces has helped make trans people more visible and able to reach isolated community members, but has come at the cost of building strong intra-community relationships. I think the internet age has warped the perception of what kinds of behavior towards other people are acceptable. Our minds have been hijacked by algorithms that prioritize engagement, which favor the most inflammatory rhetoric possible, leading people to have less regard for the humanity of the people on the other side of the screen. We need to be kinder and less judgmental towards others, especially people we suspect of being eggs. Obey the Prime Directive. Don't intervene unless you're asked to. I'm not saying any of this to condescend or gatekeep. It's a good thing to be visibly trans online. It can help other people. However, we could all benefit with more face-to-face connection with the community rather than just doing it through social media. I know it's easy to stay isolated and only talk online, but your brain needs face-to-face interaction if that's possible. I know painfully personally that it's harder, especially if you're geographically, economically, or socially isolated. However, it's also a lot more rewarding. You get the possibility to make a real impact in someone's life and connect with them more deeply. This is what Jax couldn't handle. He hated himself so much that he wouldn't let anyone get close. He wouldn't let anyone connect with him. This is why Ribbit thought forcing that connection was a good idea, but it probably wasn't. Jax was not ready. You can only leave the door open for possible connection. The other person has to walk through it on their own. My egg cracking didn't happen in a vacuum. My shell was fragile for years before it happened, but I wasn't ready then. The thing that pushed me to hatch was consuming art created by trans people about their experiences. This is why stories like the Amazing Digital Circus are so important. This is why characters like Jax are so important. Art is disarming. Because it's not real and merely simulates the human experience, the stakes feel lower, making it easier to withdraw your defenses and let other people connect with you. Sometimes that can give you the courage to let other people know you or even know yourself. Jax is a fictional character. He allows us to empathize with and understand eggs without speculating about real people. Simulated egg cracking is safer than egg cracking itself. My point is that connection with other people, whether through reality or fiction, is so important. It might just save your life. Had I not figured out I was trans on my own terms, I might have abstracted. I was suicidal. Like Jax, I might have taken my own life and never got the chance to be myself. Jax represents the failed timeline where the mask consumed me, where the simulated person became more real than the real person hidden behind it. Finding yourself in a healthy way is possible, but Jax is a cautionary tale that the other outcome is possible too. If you know someone struggling like Jax, embodying his perspective can help you be kind to them, understand them, and help when they're ready. If you haven't found yourself yet, I hope you can someday.
How are you supposed to like the part of yourself that just makes you worse than everyone else?
'Cause it exists. It's a part of you that's real. And the only you that you should care about is the real you. You have to choose to love yourself, even if it doesn't make sense.
Loving yourself is hard, especially when you struggle to even understand who you are in the first place, or have internalized that your personality or identity or trauma makes you less than everyone else. However, even if it hurts, that's still part of who you are and what makes you, you. Fighting it won't change that. It will only make things worse. I know it's a scary time right now, but being yourself is so worth it. It feels so much better than trying to live out a simulation of who you think other people want you to be. You can be who you truly want, who you truly are, through simulation or reality. You are you. That's what matters. I know I'm late, but happy Pride Month. And as always, thank you for watching.